Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, when you have a stroke, you must speak slowly, be understood. And I've discovered that when I speak slowly, people listen. They think I'm going to say something important. But when I first had my stroke, I couldn't say a word. Now, what does an actor do who can't talk? Wait for silent pictures to come back? But I was depressed because I was going to do a picture with my son, Michael. And he said to me, listen, Dad, just keep working with the speech therapist and then we'll do the movie. Now that made me mad. I said, Michael, why don't you work with my speech therapist? Yeah. And when you talk like I talk, we'll do the movie. But, you know, I'm very proud of my son, Michael. If I knew that he was going to be so famous, I would have been nicer to him when he was young. Be nice to your kids. You never know how they'll grow up. But I kept working with my speech therapist, even now. Last week, we exercised. The shade of her shawl was shiny and sheer. Not bad. But try to do that in a conversation. But I'm here to talk about my book. Let's face it. You know, although I have written 9 books, I'm really not a writer. But I like writing because I get to play all the parts, young people, old people, women, and no director to criticize me. And I like that. I like that because then I think of a scene. I said, hey, Kirk, that was terrific, and I wrote it down. But my book is dedicated to my grandchildren and the younger generation. Because let's face it, the world is in a mess. And we, autobiographies, should help the kids handle that mess. I think now it's very difficult to talk to young people. They're usually involved with the computer or the cell phone or tapping the rhythm of an iPod. No, when I was young, we didn't have any of that, but we talked more. I remember a conversation I had with my mother. I was 5 years old. It was in the kitchen. It was snowing, cold. The fire was crackling in the stove. My sister was away at school. So I had my mother all to myself. I liked that. And I was watching the snow falling. Ma, where does the snow come from? My mother was stirring a pot of soup, and she said, it's the angels cleaning the porch of heaven. gee, I said, heaven must be a very clean place. And I look out at the snow, and Mom, how was I born? My mother kept stirring the soup. I said, tell me, Ma, how was I born? My mother put the ladle down, wiped her hand on the apron, and came to me at the window, and she said, Issa, that's what my name. It was a morning like this, cold, snowing. She said this. And I said, then what? Well, she says, your sisters were at school, and I was preparing their lunch. And then she went back to the sink and started peeling potatoes. What? I said, well, then what? And then she says, well, I thought I saw something, and I wiped away the frost on the window, and I was amazed. And she kept peeling potatoes. I said, well, what did you see? She sighed. He walked back to me, and she put her arms around me and gave me a squeeze. I liked that. And she said, you know, I saw a gold box. I said, a gold box? And she nodded, yes. What did you do? She said, well, I went out, I grabbed my shawl first, and went out, and you know, it was a gold box carved with trees and flowers. But open it. Did you open the box? She gave me a big smile. Yes. What was in it? You. Me? I was stunned. Then I said, well, what happened to the gold box? And she says, son, and she put her hand on my face, and she said, I was so happy to have you. I didn't think about the box. And then when I looked, it was gone. Oh, gee, Mom, you should have. My sister Samuel in the house, tramping the feet to get the snow off the galoshes, all talking at once. I was mad. I mean, it was so quiet when I was having a conversation with my mother. Now, here I am, 90 years old, at the 92nd Street Y, and let's face it, how often do we have a chance to talk with a God who was born in a gold box? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. By way of just expressing my appreciation to this guest here, I'm just going to say a few words because it's true that a few Hollywood actors achieved genuine stardom in the late 40s into early 50s. Burt Lancaster, Robert Mitchum, Tony Curtis, Jack Lemmon, William Holden, some of the names that come to mind. But Kirk Douglas is the only one who has continued to develop his artistic gifts, not merely as an actor, but as a prolific writer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And for me, you know, it's been more than 60 years that you have been creating compelling characters. A young man with a horn, Doc Holliday, a colonel during World War I, Spartacus. And perhaps the most compelling character you've created is Kirk Douglas. because as those who've read the 4 marvelous autobiographical books that you've written can attest, that poor upstate New York boy named Isur Danielovich shaped an identity through ambition, talent, perseverance, and a moral compass. And to me, that creation, Kirk Douglas, is something to cherish these days.
Now, please stop, because you make me feel I'm dead.
No. Not the idea. So, the occasion, obviously, for tonight is the publication of the 4th autobiographical book called, let's face it, 90 Years of Living, Loving, and Learning. And I'm delighted to tell you that Kirk Douglas has agreed to stay for a little while after the interview to sign some copies, though there are many pre-signed copies available. I'm going to start off with a question or two about the writing, because as a writer myself, I'm fascinated by the process. And then I'll be asking some questions about the films. And my husband Mark and I prepared about 8 film clips to be interspersed throughout the interview. We can't resist sharing with this audience and with you some of the scenes that have really marked us.
Right.
Now, when I was reading with such delight this past weekend, The Ragman's Son, and then, let's face it, your sense of detail is so precise that I'm guessing you kept some kind of journal or diary during all of those years of making films?
Not at all. I never kept a diary. When I wrote my first book, The Ragman's Son, the publisher said, "Do you want to call that The Ragman's Son?" Why? I said, "Because that's what I am, the Ragman's Son." And that was the title of the book.
Yeah. And how did you remember the details, for example, of each of the films that you made, the details even of your time at St. Lawrence College, the wrestling? I mean, I, for one, think I have a pretty good memory, but I could never have remembered that massive amount of information.
Well, I don't know. You see, to me, writing is taking inventory. And I'd say to my son Michael, all my kids, I say, you should write your book. Even if they don't publish it, it's a way of looking back in the past and see what you were, and see where you came from, what you are, and hopefully what you aspire to be. We should all take inventory, and that's what I try to do when I write a book.
That's great. Well, it's wonderful to be blessed with a memory that can keep those details. Now, when you prepare these books, when you compose them, do you actually write or do you dictate?
Well, I do both. Since my stroke, my writing is not very legible. As a matter of fact, I don't understand what I write. But usually I have a wonderful assistant, Grace, and I talk to her and she understands my speech and she's put it in the computer. I don't know anything about computers. Well, I tell you, you need them because you say, what did I say? And you look at it. And it works very well.
Oh, yeah. I'm rather dependent on my computer by now. And did the process change then? Because you have, it was in 1988, Ragman's Son, then your second, Climbing the Mountain, My Search for Meaning, that was 97, My Stroke of Luck in 2002, and now Let's Face It. Did you, for the earlier books before the stroke, did you prefer to actually write it out?
Yes. I still really like, but as I say, I have difficulty with my handwriting.
Sure.
But before that, I always wrote by hand. And then they transcribed it into the computer. And I said, oh, that's terrific.
Because one of the reasons I'm asking the question is that in reading your books, I somehow get the feeling that it is so conversational. In other words, it doesn't feel like somebody wrote a draft and then revised it so it would be better English or better whatever. It sounds as if you were talking to me. And that's one of the gifts, I guess, that an actor like yourself can bring to that writing process.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's the way I try to write, like I'm saying something. And my point of view changed drastically after I wrote My Stroke of Luck, because I was describing my stroke, how I would handle it, and I had such gratification in the response. People who had a stroke or people who knew one that had were inspired by my book. As a matter of fact, one night the phone rang and Lucy Johnson, President Johnson's daughter, was on the phone. And she said, "Kirk, I'm reading your book, My Stroke of Luck, to my mother, and she likes it." Well, that made me feel good. So the next day I wrote a book, I wrote on the book, "Dear Lady Bird, you're a big girl now, you should have your own book." But, you know, to have, see, an actor looks for a response, a response from the people. And as I say, I'm really not a writer, I'm really an actor, and I wanted a response from my book.
I would say that you are a great communicator who uses different media or formats to connect with people. And it's clear, you know, even from the little presentation that you made earlier, you know, what a great guy you are and, you know, how much heart you have. But I'm reminded of something you said many years ago, that you've made a career out of playing sons of bitches. And I'm guessing that you said that.
I'm very good at that.
I know. And I'm sure that you said that with more affection than remorse. And we were thinking perhaps to show 2 clips from your early successes. In other words, the first Oscar nomination you received was for the film Champion,
yes,
which was, by the way, at the time, I see that there are people who know, a kind of low-budget, independent, black and white, gritty little movie that I know people counseled you not to do. They thought you should do something.
You know, I want to say my agents were very annoyed with me, sure, because they had me lined up to co-star with Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck in the picture called The Great Sinner. And I said, no, I want to do this picture, Champion. They had no money, nothing. And they thought I was crazy. Well, it made me a star.
Yeah.
When I saw the scene with Dan Sterling, I realized how time had passed. She was such a beautiful girl. The last time I saw Dan Sterling was in the motion picture and television home. Who was dying, and I came to, because I instituted the Alzheimer's unit there. And I came and I brought her a bowl of chili. And she was sitting by her room looking at a book, and she was so pleased that I brought her the chili. And a week later, she was dead. And to me, I guess that's why I don't want my picture, because, listen, so many of my colleagues, Burt Lancaster, I tell you, we had such fun together. No, he was wonderful. One time I was on a Sheraton dinner, and Burt introduced me. He said, Kirk Douglas would be the first to admit he's very difficult. Then he took a pause and said, I would be the second. But, you know, those days, gone. You know, I remember taking Fred Astaire home from a dinner with Gregory Peck. He went a ride. We rode in up to his house. He had a colonial house with a long porch with pillars. He went out of the house and he danced across the porch and then went through the door. I tell you, those memories are so precious. And so sad because so many of my colleagues are gone. Probably waiting for me, I don't know. But it's sad. I don't mean to be sad. Let's be happy.
Yeah, because the other way to look at it is, and as you so eloquently put it, I think it's in this volume, where you quote the great French philosopher Michel de Montaigne, about whom my mother wrote her PhD dissertation, about how death is something that awaits us all and that we all have to make room for the next just as they made room for us. But the great thing about celluloid, about film, is that it preserves for eternity, we hope, the magical moments that people have created along the way. I, for one, am so grateful that DVDs exist now, because there was a time that we had to depend only on that nitrate, on the stock that the film was shot on. And I just heard that Ace in the Hole, this film that I think is so brilliant that Billy Wilder was reviled for in 1951, is finally going to come out on DVD from the Criterion Collection, a wonderful group that restores films and has great commentaries, which will give people the chance to see how way ahead of its time that cynical tale was. And it preserves forever the beauty of Jan Sterling at that time and your bastard feistiness, and that's a good thing, right?
I was a tough guy.
You were very, very, very tough. Yeah.
The story is, someone saw my wife bawl me out, and the guy said, "That's Spartacus?"
Okay, but I'm going to now move on to some aspect that shows just how tough you have been, but behind the camera and in real life, not just in the parts that you've played. One of the reasons that my husband Mark and I have such respect for you and talk about you all the time is that you were essentially the first of the major Hollywood stars, at least in the 50s, who became a producer. You created your own production company. You named it the Bryna Company after your mother, Bryna. And what did you do? You produced Paths of Glory, for starters, which I consider the greatest war film ever made in the English language. I say English language because Grand Illusion, gets in there in France. But Stanley Kubrick, a very young, at that time, unknown director, you took a chance, to some extent, on him and on the project. There were a lot of reasons that film had trouble getting made, but you were the producer as well as the star, and Kubrick can be a rather tough guy to meddle with, from what I understand as well. And then you produced Spartacus, with Stanley Kubrick ultimately becoming the director as well. So before we show clips from those two films, what was it that made you decide to become a producer? Did you feel that that was the way to control your projects?
Well, I became a producer, or not really a producer. I wanted to do something that I liked. So when I started my production company with my name, Bryna, because that was my mother's name. And my mother is an illiterate Russian peasant who came to this country. And years later, I took her in a limousine along Times Square, and there's a billboard a whole block long. Bryna present the Vikings. And I said to my mother, see what the name is? I told her how to write B-R-Y-N-A, Bryna. And my mother looked at it and says, America, such a wonderful land. but anyhow, to have your own productions coming, you had a chance, of course, like to make Spartacus and Path of Glory, but also I had a little bit of muscle. When I did Spartacus, it was the McCarthy era, and McCarthy was coming down on Hollywood, especially the writers. And one of the famous writers was Dalton Trumbull, who spent a year in jail. So he would write an assumed name. When we wrote Spartacus, he would use his name Sam Jackson. And suddenly in the middle of that, I said, what are we going to put on the screen? Sam Jackson. And Kubrick, who had been fired by Marlon Brando, and Marlon Brando took over the picture when I attacked, and I took Kubrick to direct Spartacus. He said, put my name on. And Stanley, when you feel bad, you have nothing to do with the writing. The picture was shooting when he came in. And that night, I thought about it. And I wrote in my book, I was lying on the bed with my dog. I love dogs. And the dog's name was Danny. By the way, Danny, his real name was Daniel Lopez, my name. He's a Jewish dog, but he didn't know. but I said to Danny, Rover, and look, I thought even a dog wants to use his own name. So the next day, I said, we will use Dalton Trumbull, and I did, and that broke the blacklist. That what I never thought of that.
Yep, that's how an actor moves up a notch in my estimation and becomes a political or at least cultural hero.
In Spartacus, it was so wonderful to work with such great actors. Lawrence Levity, Sarah Lawrence, Peter Ustinov, T. Sim, and Tony Curtis. You know, when I was a kid, I wrote, only fan letter I ever wrote to Charles Lawson. He played the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I would ask him in my letter something about acting. He never answered. But when we were shooting the picture, I used to watch him act. And I learned a lot about acting.
Now, I love the way the scene that we showed just ended because there was a tear coming down your cheek. In other words, even tough guys can cry. What interests me is that these two films, a bit unlike your first major role, certainly Ace in the Hole and Champion, there's such a keen sense of moral justice or injustice that informs both Colonel Dax in Paths of Glory and the character of Spartacus, who becomes the leader. And I'm just wondering, do you think that these parts are informed by your own moral sense, your own sense of justice? In other words, you didn't just do these because they were good parts in good movies, but that these were things you wanted to say.
You know, that's an interesting question because in retrospect, I realized that I have to square what is Spartacus, a man fighting for freedom. And that's what we are all fighting for even now. But I discovered things about myself in retrospect. But I have to learn a lot from the pictures that I have done. I don't know if I ever make another movie. They have to find a part for a 9-year-old guy who cannot speak well. But I will find that part.
I bet there are some aspiring screenwriters in the audience who could rise to the occasion. I guess for me, it is interesting because you've made 87 films, if my count is correct from one of the things I read. And even though there are a lot of sons of bitches and there are a lot of, shall we say, less noble films or parts that you've played, there is a consistency. I mean, maybe some of the films I've looked at in the past week, for example, I didn't even know about this motion picture called The Juggler, and I'm very embarrassed to admit this because I wrote a book about film and the Holocaust, and The Juggler had never crossed my path, and I hadn't even read anything about it. But the film was made in 1953, and in this film, you played a Holocaust survivor from Germany who goes to Israel, and it was not only set and shot in Israel, but as far as I can tell, it was probably the first American film to deal directly with
That was the
Holocaust
first
survivors.
film that I did in Israel. I've done 4 films in Israel. That was the first one.
Yeah, and I just finally managed to see it. It was very difficult. And you play a juggler, and I got to say, you actually juggle with such amazing dexterity that at times my husband and I were looking to see, is there a double in there? And we realized, no, it's you. So you didn't just learn to box for champion, but to juggle for the juggler and many other
But
crafts.
you know, that's one wonderful thing about being an actor. You get to learn so many things, riding horses. You know, people would say to me, you know, Kirk, I watched you at movies. You were so good at riding a horse. Do you ride very often? And I said, only when they pay me.
Okay, as long as you brought in the horse, I have read in your books that your favorite among all the film roles that you have done is Lonely Are the Brave. And again, terrible confession from the professor of American film history, I had never seen it in its entirety. So I finally watched it last week. Thank goodness I was interviewing you because I would have missed what turned out to be a really compelling, riveting cinematic experience. And I'm just mentioning this because it is available on VHS, if not DVD. The film is such an interesting take on a modern day in the 50s cowboy who is out of whack with the environment, you know, starting with the airplanes in the sky. This is not the typical Western in 1870. This is, you know, a good 70, 80 years later. And we do have a little clip that we wanted to show you. This was made in '62.
It's my favorite picture.
Yeah. And I think it may be your favorite picture, if I dare say, because among other things, the character you play is such a noble outlaw. You know, this is a great American tradition. Somebody who loves freedom on the one hand, but has such a fierce sense of loyalty on the other.
Now I realize why it's my favorite picture, because I've played so many sons of bitches. Well, finally I played a good guy.
Absolutely. And if you think about your own reasons, I mean, is there any other aspect of Lonely Are the Brave that makes it your favorite movie? Was it about the message, or was it the tone?
Well, I like the character didn't realize how noble he really was. He was a simple guy, and you have to love him, and that was a change the pace for me.
Yeah, yeah.
And it talks about friendship. He was willing to do for his friend. In the audience today is my best friend, Jack Valenti, who wrote the foreword to this book. And Jack, he's a real writer. He wrote the book, the time, the place, which is coming out next month. Don't miss it.
Yeah, Jack Valenti is here in the audience with us tonight, so we don't have the lights, but we salute you wherever you happen to be. I think also one of the reasons that I personally found Lonely Are the Brave so compelling, it wasn't just the Jenna Rollins relationship with you. It was one of Walter Matthau's early films. And he plays the detective, the sheriff rather, who's on your trail.
Yes.
And he is remarkably idiosyncratic in the part. I mean, there's something so unique about the way he plays him, the way he chews the gum, and the way that after a certain point you realize that this sheriff has a begrudging respect for the outlaw that he's supposed to catch and would just as well let him go on his way.
You know, I gave Walter Matthau his first part in movies in a picture called Indian Father, and he had to ride a horse, and he hated horses. And he would curse the horse in Yiddish. But he was a wonderful actor and a wonderful guy.
You made at least 3 films, I think, with Walter Matthau, if I remember. You made at least 3 films with him.
Yes.
And actually, you've had some wonderfully enduring relationships with other actors. I'm curious, of all the co-stars you've had, whether there's a particular actor or actress that holds a place in your heart, because you made 7 films with Lancaster, you made 4 films with John Wayne, right?
Yes.
3 with Matthau. Anyone else that I'm ignoring?
Well, you know, John Wayne, because politically we were on opposite sides, but he always asked for me. I was in London, and John called me from Hollywood. He said he had a script in his company that I should do, and he would have played a little part of it. So he presented to me, Cast a Giant Shadow. Now, to think that a movie like that came from John Wayne, and you know, he used to say to me, Kirk, everybody calls me Duke. Why do you always call me John? I said, John, Duke, Prince, a king, but never Duke.
Actually, this is just too good a lead-in. We have a clip from Cast a Giant Shadow of you with John Wayne. And by the way, you know, I was astounded to learn that the project originated with him, because I thought, given your sort of proud sense of Judaism, especially maybe over the past 15 years, but even earlier, I thought that the desire to play Mickey Marcus, the American who became a real hero to the fledgling state of Israel in the late 40s, that would have originated with you, John Wayne. Okay.
John Wayne, he was quite a character. And you say I did 4 movies with him. And, you know, we used to argue. And the gratification I got was when his son, Michael, told me when John Wayne died, he said, you know, my father loved you. I said, he did? Because we worked for picture, but we always in conflict like this.
Yeah. Well, politically, if I understand, you were not exactly on the same side of issues. John Wayne, well known for his more conservative, hawk-type views, and I think you've always espoused a far more progressive agenda, a much more liberal and humanitarian one.
Yes.
So I can imagine that there were, you know, tensions, but obviously within the context of a deep mutual respect. The idea of making this film, again, in Israel, I mean, I'm curious to what extent playing parts like Mickey Marcus in Cast a Giant Shadow or the Holocaust survivor in The Juggler, were those aspects, I mean, that put you more in touch with your own Judaism? Or did you want to play these parts because of your Judaism? You know?
Probably both. You know, in my book, I have a chapter called Don't Be Too Religious. And people are a little bit amazed that I did it, because I studied with a rabbi once a week. And religion fascinates me. But it fascinates me because religion can be a curse. It will see what's happening now with a religion that believes you should kill other people. How can God want that to happen? So my sons are not Jewish because my two wives were not Jewish. So I permit them to be whatever they want. All I ask is that they become caring people who care for others. And that way, all my sons have not failed me. And Michael has done so many things. He did a documentary in Africa where they were kidnapping boys of about 12 years of age and filling up with dope and making them killers. And he had a boy who went through that and was trying to find his mother. And in the sea, Michael had an arm around him, and the black boy looked very grim. And Michael started to sing him that, oh, I love you, a bushel and peck, and a hug around the neck. And suddenly, the boy smiled. Wow, it was so touching. So the longer I live, the more I think that religion should teach people to care for others. Whatever religion it just teach you that is right religion.
This is a more serious moment that we're having, and I think almost all the clips that we selected thus far have a darker or dramatic tone to them. I did want to include one moment of levity in the clips because you are also a wonderful comic actor. It's just that we don't talk about that as much or see it as much, perhaps, in your work. But we chose a clip from a more recent film because we don't want to just show that gorgeous young thing, Kirk Douglas. You have grown into a wonderfully sexy older thing, too. We chose a clip from the movie Oscar, which permitted you to have fun, I believe, in one of the opening scenes of the film. It stars Sylvester Stallone, an actor that we didn't really associate that much with comedy either, because not unlike you, he made his bones playing a young fighter in a low-budget independent film that nobody thought would go anywhere, and he got an Oscar nomination and, you know, all that too.
I want to interpret about humor. Without humor, you cannot exist. And the Jewish people have always had humor. I quote something that Mel Brooks wrote. He's so bad. He said, as a Jew, if I don't laugh, I will cry. And he's very, very brilliant. And I thought of all the comedians, and so many of them are Jewish. And I thought all the jokes they say, going all the way back to the joke between George Burns and Jack Benny, when George Burns said he had trouble sleeping, and Jack Benny gave him a suppository. And he said, what do I do with it? He said, well, you stick up, what? Yes, he said, in Europe they all do it. I said, okay, I'll try. So that night, the phone rang in Jack Benny's house by 2 o'clock in the morning. Jack Benny, you know, he said, George? Yeah. Why are you calling me? He said, Jack, my ass is asleep, but I'm awake. A laugh is very important. I mean, I admire comedians that can make people laugh. I think it's much more important than me playing a dramatic scene. I think it's a greater talent to make people laugh. By the way, I have to admit that I also have a fan here, the locksman, who sent me locks and watches and came over to see me today. And also, I have a fan, Jane Watts. She has been my fan for at least 40 years. Never forget the anniversary, a birthday, and anything. And she has had a tragedy this week because her dog died. And as you see, I love dogs. I talk about in my book my Jewish dog, Danny. And the other dog is not Jewish, but other dog has only one eye. So he loses Danny like seeing-eyed dog. And they get around, okay.
It's okay.
Sometimes as a guy, for a guy that can't talk, I talk a lot.
And we are grateful for it. I mean, I do have one question, but it may be a little hard to answer. I don't know. I'll contextualize it in this way. When you received the honorary Oscar in 1996, I remember I was at an Oscars party, and we were being raucous, and we were betting, and we were throwing things at the television screen, and this and that. And when you came out, just everybody in the room stopped and watched really carefully. And there was such an outpouring in the room I was in, and I'm sure every room where the Oscars were being watched, of not only affection, but respect, because it's a fact that many people, when they've had either a stroke or any other kind of debilitating thing, the impulse is probably to just go hide. I mean, to lick your wounds and to figure it's over. And you got out there and you showed this remarkable strength and resiliency, fulfilling what Steven Spielberg was saying that night about your courage as well as your conscience. I mean, if you had to kind of pinpoint, what is it that enabled you? I mean, I'm guessing that one answer has to be your wonderful wife, Anne Douglas, but what has enabled you to do all that you've been able to do when most others would have folded up?
Listen, that was the first time since my stroke that I spoke in public. And I said to my wife, well, when Spielberg gives me the Oscar, I would just say thank you. So when I came out, a few thousand people were standing and applauding. I thought to myself, I have to say more than thank you. So I did say a little bit more. But what I remember in the reaction of people, King Hussein of Jordan, the one that died, was watching the show, and he wrote me a letter. He congratulated me, and he invited me to visit his father in Jordan. And then he died. His son, the present king of Jordan, took up his father's invitation, and my wife and I went to Jordan as guests of the king, and all that came about because I was able to say more than thank you.
You are an inspiration to young and older people, I've got to tell you that. I'm guessing, too, that your family has been of tremendous importance. I know how important your wife, Anne Douglas, is, and in a moment, if we have a time, I'd like to acknowledge the philanthropic work that you do together with her through the Douglas Foundation. But it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge a former Real Pieces guest that I had on this stage in that very seat, Michael Douglas. You have 3 remaining sons. We all are very, very sorry about the passing of your son, Eric, somebody that I actually knew personally. But I know that you have enjoyed working with your sons. And I'm just wondering how much of the sort of continuum between creating films and your family have been important.
You know, in my book, I hesitated and finally I wrote about my son, Eric, my youngest son, that died from an overdose. And that's a tragedy. No matter how many things you go through, all the rehabilitation places you go, but I think in people in my profession, so many of the children have died for suicide or overdose. I remember William Beck crying in my arms when his son committed suicide. And I wrote about my son, Eric, in the attempt to maybe help other people, because he was taught this, the 3 C's. You did it, caught it, you can't cure it, you can't control it. But when you are sitting by the grave of your son, you keep thinking, what did I do wrong? And it's hard to get over that. And you just have to make an effort, because it's very difficult for families that have tried all they can and they fail with their son. And I think that's a tragedy of my profession, because my son Peter, who lives in Montecito, has 4 children. I said to him, Peter is 6'2", has curly hair. I always wanted to have curly hair. I said, Peter, why didn't you become an actress? And he said, what? And compete with you and Michael? So you realize that in the family, there's a lot of competition. Because they had 2 sons who committed suicide. I don't want to talk about that.
Well, the good thing is that you've gotten to work with Michael.
You know, I bought a book years ago, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I love that book. I went to Broadway, had it done as a play in New York. I played it for 6 months. The critics killed it. Then I went back and I tried to make a movie out of it for 10 years. My son Michael was just coming out of Streets of San Francisco, a TV show with my friend Carl Moulton. He said, Dad, let me try this. I said, okay. I didn't think you could put it together. In 1 year, he put it together. He won all the Oscars. And the part that I wanted to play, he played Jack Nicholson, who won an Oscar. So I think Michael knows what he's doing. And that, if I can impose one more story. Michael and I did a documentary, improvised it. And in one scene I said to him, Michael, was I a good father? And he paused, a long pause. When he said, ultimately, you were a great father. And in my book, I write about that pause. it was very important to me because then I realized that my son meant something to me at a later period in life. And my son was the one who gave me the present on my 86th birthday a car. And on the new car, and on the dashboard, it said, I recognize the handwriting. Dad, you always say I ask for nothing, but you gave me a lot. I treasure that. I treasure that. And I'm very proud of all my sons, including Eric, who could have been a good actor. But the thing is, you just try to do the best for your family. And sometimes you succeed, and sometimes you fail. But you just try to do the best as you can do.
Yeah. Now, I know that there are people in the audience who have questions as well. We have time for a few. If we could raise the lights a little bit, and if you could raise your hand, I will try to repeat. There's a woman right there on the aisle, yes?
Hi, Mr. D. I had the pleasure of working with you on that last movie that was shown. It runs in family. My name is Beth. And I'm just so happy to see you again. I think you look great and sound great. And I wanted to say hi. And I just wanted to know if you were still doing your work with the playgrounds and the parks and stuff that you were doing.
The question is, are you still doing the work with the playgrounds and the parks? That's part of the Douglas Foundation.
Well, my wife, we met in Paris. We got married, and she became a citizen. And she was so proud. And she said, I want to do something for the country. And she read in the paper the terrible conditions of all the playgrounds in the schools of Los Angeles. And she said, I want to fix them. I thought she was crazy. But she influenced me to sell all the paintings that we had accumulated over the years, which had increased in value. And with that mother, she started refurbishing and building playgrounds. She has done so far 360 playgrounds. Thank you.
She's actually backstage.
Oh, I'm looking for her. Here, she's back there.
She's backstage. Sorry about that. And also, I read that one of the playgrounds, or maybe more, is in Israel, and that there's a playground that you've developed also for Arab as well as Jewish children.
Yes, in Jerusalem, I did 2 playgrounds. One, a high plateau, an Arab playground, and lower, a smaller playground for Jewish kids. And I wanted, hopefully, they will play soccer together. They never play soccer together.
Not yet, maybe.
But you tried.
Well, actually, I have to go by the order. I think I remember it was a gentleman here and then a woman here.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. There was a scene that I do remember with you and Eric. It was a very small scene in Tales from the Crypt.
This man is remembering a scene from Tales from the Crypt between Kirk Douglas and his son Eric Douglas.
And it was so powerful. It was so powerful. It was so real. And if no one has seen it, it's definitely worth seeing because there was an energy in that scene that was just different than anything I've ever seen done before.
That it was so powerful and real that he recommends anyone who hasn't seen it to try to do so because there was an intensity there that is unusual.
In my book, I have a letter that I received about that picture, Tales from the Crypt, that I did with Eric. And he said in my letter, imagine Eric Douglas stole the picture from Kirk Douglas. I was so proud of that. Thank you.
Yes.
What advice would you give to a 12-year-old boy that has gotten bitten by the acting bug?
What advice would you give to a 12-year-old boy who has been bitten by the acting bug?
Listen. I'm the wrong guy to ask. When Michael went to college, I thought he was going to be a lawyer. And I was very proud. Suddenly he said, Dad, I'm going to be in a play. I said, a play? Okay, I went to see him in the play. It was a small part in the Shakespearean play. After the play, I came backstage. He said, how was that? I said, Michael, you were awful. I said, I didn't understand the word that Shakespeare had written for you. And I thought that would cure him and he would become a lawyer. About 2 months later, he was in another play. Same thing, I came up and saw him. Dad, how was that? Michael, you were very good. And he was very good from that day on in everything that he did.
I guess there's nothing we can tell him to dissuade him. On the aisle in the back there, yes?
The first movie I saw you in was Draw with James Coburn. It's a movie I never hear you speak about. Would you talk about making Draw?
Could you talk about making the film Draw with James Coburn?
My God. I mean, suddenly I saw a scene for Oscar and I forgot about it. And now, you Draw, I remember it, was made in Canada. And Coburn, I remember he was, most of the actors I worked with, I liked. There were a few I didn't like, but Coburn I liked. That's all I have to say.
Okay. On the aisle here.
Mr. Douglas, I think you should have won the Oscar for The Bad and the Beautiful. Can you tell us what you learned about acting by working with Vincent Minnelli?
I think you should have won the Oscar for The Bad and the Beautiful. Can you tell us what you learned about acting working with Vincent Minnelli, the director?
Well, Vincent Minnelli directed me in the 3 pictures. The best one was not The Bad and the Beautiful. The best one was Lust for Life. But The Bad and the Beautiful, I think, was a very good picture about picture making. Somehow when you make a movie about making movies, it doesn't come off. But Bad and the Beautiful was very good. And I think Lana turned in the best performance she ever given. She was wonderful.
And we almost showed a clip, by the way, from Lust for Life, but we were running out of time because the 3 Oscar nominations, as some of you know, were Champion, Bad and the Beautiful, and Lust for Life. You might want to know, though, that one of my favorite guests that I've ever had on this stage, Martin Scorsese, when he made this fantastic personal journey through American movies, it's called. It's a 4.5-hour documentary about American film, and it starts with The Bad and the Beautiful. It starts with you, actually, and it's a wonderful way to get into that sense of Hollywood history. Okay, here, and then there, and then there. Yes.
Mr. Douglas, I heard that you have a personal interest in taking a very hot shower and then a cold one afterwards.
I've read that you have an interest in taking a very hot shower and then a very cold one afterwards.
Is that true, and is that the way you start your day?
Is that true, and is that the way you start your day?
No.
I mean, the only thing I could add is the detail. I was astounded and delighted to read that you do work out every morning, however. You've had a personal trainer for, 40 years? And that every morning there is a routine that you
Yes.
actually go
Yes.
and physically do. And I have a feeling that
My
helps.
trainer is older than I. Why you laugh? He's 92. And I said to him, your exercises do more for you than they do for me. Because he goes salsa dancing twice a week. And he's 92 years old. And I work with him every morning when I am in Los Angeles. When we go to Montecito, I don't work out.
Message is exercise more important than showers. Yes.
Mr. Douglas, perhaps you've shared with us so much about your relationship with your fellow actors, you've shared with us your relationship with your children, but you haven't shared how somebody at 90 is as absolutely stunning as you are, wonderfully sexy.
You haven't yet shared with us how someone at the age of 90 is so absolutely sexy and wonderful. Stunning, thank you.
Will you come backstage?
How would you explain as well your physical stamina you've just explained to us with your trainer, but how do you explain the fact that your mental acuity, you are so sharp, you don't miss a beat. Is there some advice you might give to others?
All right, is there basically any advice that you can give to others about the mental acuity, how sharp you are, not merely the physical stamina that you've just talked about with exercise?
I'm yours.
Okay, gentleman there, second row, yes? Go right ahead, yeah. You're next. Sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Douglas, after such a long and distinguished career, such a prolific career, I'm embarrassed to ask you this question, but I gotta know this. Since I'm 80 years old, did you really do all the stunts in the Vikings?
The question is, did you really do all the stunts in the Vikings?
Yes. You know, when I have my helicopter crash, the doctor, the X-ray on my back, and he said, Kirk, do you do all your stunts? And I said, yes. Yes, I can see them. I thought that was part of what I liked. And I thought in my youth, I was a terrible show-off. So I like to, with a tricky man or handling gun, I love to learn that. And I try to do it, walking or whatever. Now I look back, I said, I was very foolish.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Mr. Douglas. My name is Peter, and I wanted to tell you that this is one of the greatest thrills of my life, to be able to sit and watch some of your movies with you, okay? But I also wanted to tell you two other things. One is Ace in the Hole was by far one of my favorite movies growing up, and I thought one of your most powerful performances, and I'm quite grateful to hear that it is coming out on DVD. I just went to see it at the Film Forum. I was blessed that they put it on the big screen and I got to see it again. That and also your Touched by an Angel performance. I don't know if you could tell us about either of those two personal things. And again, it was a pleasure to have the honor to watch your movie because of you.
Now that's the intelligent guy.
Did you all hear? I mean, basically thanking the ability to watch films with Kirk Douglas in his presence, you know, how wonderful that is. But favorite film, Ace in the Hole, recently saw it at Film Forum. Could Kirk Douglas talk about that and about Touched by an Angel, the wonderful episode that you had done on TV?
Touched by an Angel. What was that about?
When you first had the stroke and you were dealing with your grandson and having a bar mitzvah.
Dealing with a grandson and having a bar mitzvah after the stroke.
I remember being very touched by it when I saw it.
Oh, yes. Very good movie, but not great.
And in terms of working with Billy Wilder, because that's one of the things I'm always fascinated by, Billy Wilder had a reputation for being one of the nastiest directors in Hollywood because he basically directed with quips and insults, from what I understand, as opposed to nurturing. But to play this really cynical newspaper man in Ace in the Hole, were there any particularly, digging, vicious directions that you were given?
Billy Wilder was a brilliant director. And I loved work with him, and also he was a friend. But I was about decisions that I have made that were good, decisions that made that were bad. Billy Wilder wanted me to play the lead in Starlight
17.
13.
17.
And I saw it on Broadway after that, and I turned it down. Bill Holden played it and won an Oscar. So I have done some dumb things in my life.
Well, I'm getting a signal that we need to make some time for signing books. You may think you've done some dumb things in your life. You've also done some of the most remarkable things with your life. I have to tell you that of the over 100 people I've interviewed on this stage, tonight stands out for me. It is such an honor to be able to share an hour and a half or so with someone who has been a great actor, producer, director too, we didn't talk about the directing, author, and perhaps most importantly, humanitarian. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.